The crystal chandeliers above cast fractured light across the polished marble floor, as if spotlighting the moment it all began. The receptionist's smirk barely twitched, but the damage had already landed. "Are you sure that card works, ma'am?" he asked, his voice dripping with a condescension so casual it felt rehearsed. Heads subtly turned in the grand lobby of the Sterling Crown, Chicago's most opulent hotel, where the elite checked in and the world watched silently. Monique Hayes stood at the counter, poised in a navy blue suit that hugged her tall, graceful frame. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her heels modest, her presence commanding without a hint of aggression. She didn't flinch at the remark, didn't ask for clarification, didn't raise her voice. Instead, she gently returned the black titanium card to her wallet and looked the man in the eye, her gaze as steady as her pulse. Around her, murmurs floated from lounge chairs draped in velvet, guests sipping champagne or typing with urgency into glowing laptops. To the untrained eye, she might have appeared out of place. A black woman, alone, checking into the Sterling Crown without an assistant or entourage. No designer logos screaming status, no over-the-top accessories to prove her worth. Just quiet certainty, wrapped in crisp professionalism and years of discipline. And yet, that was precisely what made her presence impossible to ignore. This was a space designed for the untouchable class, global tycoons, royal heirs, film festival darlings. The lobby smelled faintly of white peonies and old money. Everything about the architecture whispered excellence. The arched ceilings, the hand-woven carpets from Persia, the gold-trimmed service desks where staff were trained not just to serve, but to evaluate silently. As Monique waited, she was aware of every glance, every assumption, every unspoken question. She knew that behind the gleaming surfaces and polished lay something more brittle, an unshakable belief in who belonged and who didn't. But Monique had walked into the Sterling Crown for a reason, and it wasn't just for a night's rest. She wasn't here by accident. Every step across that marble floor had been earned, paid for in long nights, lost weekends, and years of sacrifice. And though no one in that lobby knew it yet, they were about to witness the kind of reckoning that never made noise, but always left a mark. Monique Hayes hadn't expected a red carpet or a standing ovation, but she had expected professionalism. Instead, the moment she pulled the Centurion card from her slim leather wallet and slid it gently across the counter, the shift in atmosphere was almost palpable. Thomas Caldwell, the front desk associate in his mid-30s, paused mid-gesture. His neatly combed hair and pristine uniform gave the impression of polish. But the smirk that curled at the edge of his lips betrayed something far less refined. He tapped the card lightly with his manicured fingers, chuckled, and said just loud enough to draw attention, "Then The sentence was delivered with a tone that masqueraded as humor but left no room for misunderstanding. Several guests lounging nearby turned subtly, pretending to sip their drinks or scroll their phones, but their eyes betrayed their curiosity. A woman in pearls at the concierge desk raised an eyebrow, her lips tightening as if to suppress a knowing smile. An older man waiting with his suitcase by the elevator chuckled softly and shook his head. Monique said nothing. She'd heard this tone before. Not just the words, but the posture. The performative doubt. The way people in uniforms wielded power was not through volume, but through suggestion. A voice too polite to confront, yet loaded with resistance. It wasn't the insult that stung. It was the ritual of having to stand still while someone tested your worth in public. Thomas glanced at his screen, then at Monique, then back at the card. His expression didn't shift toward apology or acknowledgement. Instead, it sharpened into calculated suspicion. "I'm not seeing a presidential suite booked under the name Hayes," he said, dragging out the last word like it was unfamiliar or misplaced. "Let me check again. There may have been a system error." His fingers tapped the keyboard in slow, deliberate keystrokes, as if buying time. Monique remained composed. She knew exactly how this dance went. She knew the steps, the rhythm, the crescendo of condescension just before the inevitable offer to downgrade. Thomas leaned forward slightly, voice lower now, conspiratorial but still edged with dismissal. "There's a deluxe city view available. Not what you initially requested, but I think it will be suitable." The pause before the word suitable said more than the word itself. It was the kind of suggestion made to people whose presence didn't quite match the room they were trying to enter. No mention of the executive package either, he added, eyes darting toward her without fully meeting them. Sometimes bookings come through with optimistic assumptions. Another tight smile. Another small humiliation wrapped in the velvet cloth of customer service. Monique's eyes scanned the faces behind her, catching the flickers of reaction. A woman in a tailored coat whispered something to her partner and glanced away. A man in an expensive scarf scoffed under his breath before looking pointedly at the floor, uninterested in the outcome, but all too aware of its inevitability. She turned back to Thomas and asked, her voice unwavering, "Would you mind double-checking the reservation email? The confirmation came from your corporate office." Thomas gave a slight nod but offered no verbal response. He clicked with theatrical patience, as if wading through thousands of names, rather than performing a basic search. The seconds stretched. "This is so embarrassing," a woman behind Monique whispered just loudly enough for her to hear. "Why do people put themselves through this?" Thomas sighed. "Unfortunately, it seems the system didn't register an upgrade for your account. The suite is already blocked for another guest." A lie, clean and dressed in the polite fabric of formality. "I see," Monique said, reaching for her phone. She didn't raise her voice, didn't flinch, didn't demand to speak to a manager. But beneath the calm was something taut and sharpened. Not anger, conviction. She was used to systems failing her in just this way. But what Thomas didn't know, and what no one in the lobby yet understood, was that she hadn't come here to be accommodated. She had come to observe. And with every fake smile, every passive-aggressive pause, every whispered dismissal from guests who thought she couldn't hear, he was building her case for her. What he assumed was a casual gatekeeping moment was about to become something far more consequential. And Monique? She was just getting started. The following morning, Monique Hayes rose early. Not from discomfort, though the standard room she'd been reluctantly downgraded to lacked the comfort or dignity of what she had booked, but because she had already planned her day with precision. The night before, she had uploaded her notes, timestamped them, and backed up the recording from her discreet lapel camera. Now she was ready to observe more. She dressed in a soft gray blouse tucked into tailored black slacks, with flats instead of heels, calm, neutral, unassuming. Her appearance was deliberate. She didn't want to be noticed for grandeur, but for how people reacted to someone who didn't fit the mold of their imagined clientele. At 8:10 a.m., Monique approached the velvet-roped entrance of the Sterling Crown's executive lounge on the 12th floor, the kind reserved for VIPs and premium package holders. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as a concierge stood poised, checking access cards with a perfunctory nod for each guest. When Monique handed over her room key and gave her name, the concierge scanned it, frowned, and glanced at a tablet beside her. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said after a pause, her tone too polite to be casual. "Your room doesn't appear to include lounge access. This area is restricted to diamond-level guests and executive suite clients." "I booked the Sapphire package," Monique replied, her voice calm. "It includes access. You can verify that with the confirmation number." But the concierge didn't move to double-check. She simply replied, "I understand, but our system doesn't show it. Perhaps you were misinformed." The dismissal was wrapped in formality, but the coldness was unmistakable. Monique stepped aside without protest. She took out her phone and jotted a few notes. "Lounge access denied. No verification effort made. Guest behind me entered without scan. White male, mid-50s, no visible diamond ID. Tone, clipped. Eye contact, minimal." Later that day, she visited the hotel's fine dining restaurant on the mezzanine level. Though she had made a reservation through the app the night before, when she arrived, the hostess barely concealed her surprise at seeing her. "Ah. Yes, Miss Hayes, your table is ready," the young woman said, forcing a smile as she picked up a menu and turned toward the far back corner of the restaurant. The table was small, wedged between a service station and a decorative column that blocked half the view. Not ideal, but Monique said nothing. She simply observed. 5 minutes later, a middle-aged white couple arrived without a reservation. The hostess greeted them with warmth and led them to a spacious table by the window, offering a sweeping view of Lake Michigan. Monique glanced down at the menu. Then she reached for her phone. Restaurant seating bias. Reserved guests of color, seated in the corner. Walk-in white couple. Window placement without question. Staff tone warm toward them. Reserved with me. No welcome drink offered. The day continued like a steady procession of pattern recognition. At 5 p.m., Monique changed into workout clothes and headed for the hotel's state-of-the-art gym on the 3rd floor. She presented her room key to the attendant. He glanced at it, then looked at her and asked, "Are you sure this includes gym access? Can I see some form of ID as well?" "I was told my package included full access," she said, offering both the key and her ID. He took them without comment and walked over to a side terminal, tapping in her details. It took him over 2 minutes. During that time, Monique watched another guest, white, wearing noise-canceling headphones and a hoodie, walk in without stopping. No one checked him. When the attendant returned, he handed her the key. "Okay, you're good," he said. No apology, no acknowledgement. Monique offered a polite nod, but in her mind, another line had already been added to her report. "Gym access is delayed. Additional ID requested only from me." Other guests did not stop. Staff's tone neutral but guarded. The pattern of verification is selective. Back in her room, Monique reviewed the footage from the day. All legal. All within company guidelines for anonymous evaluation. Her employer didn't just fund hospitality development, it assessed it. Her work was part of a wider audit project aimed at identifying behavioral inconsistencies in high-end service ecosystems, especially those hidden beneath polished marble and customer care scripts. Every interaction was categorized and logged: eye contact, voice inflection, refusal phrasing, and placement decisions. She wasn't guessing. She was building a file, a record of how institutions professed luxury, but practiced exclusion. One tab in her document tracked micro-behaviors. Another listed overt decisions that disadvantaged certain guests. She flagged her room assignment again, and noted the discrepancy in minibar contents and the absence of a welcome gift advertised in the online package. At the bottom of her notes, she added a quiet line to herself. Every glance, every whisper, every unnecessary question is another layer of truth. Don't let any of it slip by. The Sterling Crown didn't know who Monique Hayes truly was. But they were about to. On the final morning of her stay, the Sterling Crown lobby glistened under soft gold lighting, polished to perfection as if nothing had ever gone wrong within its walls. A faint piano melody played through hidden speakers, and staff moved with rehearsed grace, ready for another day of serving an elite clientele. But this morning would not unfold according to their usual choreography. Monique Hayes stepped into the lobby, no longer in her understated attire, but in a deep navy-tailored suit. Her hair was neatly pinned, her shoulders back. Every movement as precise as the quiet power she carried. Her heels clicked against the marble tiles, each step drawing subtle attention, not just from the staff, but from the early guests waiting to check out, sip coffee, or scan the morning headlines in the lounge. Behind the front desk, Thomas Caldwell was busy typing when he looked up and saw her. His expression shifted in slow motion. First a flicker of recognition, then confusion, and then the faintest twitch of unease. She looked familiar, but something about her presence today felt different, more deliberate, more commanding. Monique approached the counter and waited patiently until he looked her fully in the eyes. "Good morning," she said calmly, her voice smooth but with unmistakable weight. "I'd like a moment of your time." Thomas offered a forced smile, clearly attempting to reclaim his rehearsed hospitality. "Of course, Miss." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick, matte black business card bordered with silver foil. She laid it on the marble counter with slow precision, its weight landing not with a sound, but with the unmistakable finality of a gavel. Monique Hayes, Global Director of Ethical Investment Evaluation, Valiant Equity. For a moment, Thomas didn't move. His eyes darted between the card and her face, his lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no sound emerged. Around them the energy of the lobby slowed. A bellhop paused mid-step. A woman setting her latte down at the cafe froze, watching. Even the doorman shifted on his heels. "I believe you remember me," Monique said, her tone still cordial but now carrying a steel edge beneath the civility. "I checked in 3 days ago. Presidential suite, black card, Hayes." Thomas swallowed hard. His face had lost all color. "Miss Hayes, I wasn't aware," No, she interrupted, still calm, not raising her voice. You weren't, because you didn't bother to check. You saw a black woman in a navy suit and assumed I couldn't possibly belong here. You downgraded my room. You mocked my Centurion card. You denied me lounge access and asked for identification when others walked past without a glance. A hush fell over the space. Conversations died. The receptionist 2 desks away froze with her hand still on a guest's passport. Even the jazz in the background seemed to retreat into silence. I didn't mean to, Thomas began, but his voice was trembling now, thin and uncertain. Monique leaned in slightly, never breaking eye contact. You didn't mean to. But you did. And what you didn't know is that I was here on assignment. Valiant Equity has spent months evaluating Sterling Crown's global locations for a potential $10 billion investment in your expansion project. My visit was not for leisure. It was your final audit. Thomas staggered backward a step, blinking as if her words had physically struck him. 10 billion? He whispered, incredulous. An internal phone rang sharply behind the desk. Another receptionist hesitated, then answered. Her voice wavered after a few brief exchanges. She covered the receiver and turned to Thomas. It's the corporate office, she said under her breath. The CEO wants you upstairs, now. Thomas looked at Monique, his lips quivering, then at the phone. But she didn't give him the chance to recover. There's no need, she said, her voice flat but clear. I've already submitted the full report. Our legal and ethics departments have been briefed. As of this morning, Valiant Equity has officially withdrawn all negotiations and financial interest in Sterling Crown. The reason is explicitly stated: systemic ethical violations and discriminatory treatment of clients based on perceived social and racial identity. A gasp rippled through the room. Someone's coffee cup clinked against its saucer. A man in a tailored suit turned from the concierge desk to stare. I suggest, she continued, that your executive board begin crisis preparations. This lobby may look the same tomorrow, but everything behind it has changed. Monique reached for her card, slipped it back into her purse, and straightened her jacket. I won't be needing a late checkout, she said, stepping away from the counter. My work here is done. She walked out with the same poise she had entered with, her stride firm, her gaze steady, never once looking back. Behind her, the once impeccable hotel descended into quiet chaos, phones ringing, guests whispering, managers summoned. The empire built on luxury, etiquette, and unspoken exclusion had just been shaken to its core by a single woman who didn't raise her voice, didn't make a scene, but simply placed a business card on the table and told the truth. And in that moment, the Sterling Crown wasn't just a building with chandeliers and velvet carpets. It became a case study in what happens when judgment overtakes service, and when someone finally says, enough. As Monique exited the Sterling Crown lobby that morning, she didn't glance back, not at the concierge desk, frozen in disbelief, nor at Thomas Caldwell, who remained standing behind the counter like a man watching his name dissolve from existence. She stepped calmly into the crisp Chicago air and disappeared into the morning crowd, leaving behind a moment that would echo far louder than she ever needed to speak. What happened next could only be described as the collapse of an illusion. A guest in the lobby had quietly recorded the entire exchange. The video was short, less than a minute. Monique's poised voice, the placement of her thick business card, the receptionist's pale face, and the shock in the room. But within hours of being uploaded to social media, it ignited like wildfire. Hashtags exploded. Check the name before you judge, black card not blacklist, Monique Hayes, and simply, 10 billion walked out. The clip amassed over 10 million views in the first 24 hours. Within 48 hours, Sterling Crown's parent company lost 28% of its market value. Stockholders panicked. Analysts called it a catastrophic drop rooted in ethical failure, not market fluctuation. High-profile investment groups announced their withdrawal from joint ventures. Luxury travel conglomerates canceled future bookings. A UAE-based hospitality fund that had committed $1.2 billion to Sterling Crown's Asian expansion immediately froze all agreements. Crisis meetings were held, but it was already too late. Worse than the financial damage was the reputational implosion. Whistleblowers surfaced. Former employees began anonymously stories of subtle racism, selective customer service, and systemic exclusion policies hidden behind polished brochures and curated press releases. Every word Monique had spoken became a lens through which a powerful industry was forced to re-examine itself. But while the world descended into media frenzies, interview requests, think pieces, and panel debates, Monique Hayes remained silent. She declined every invitation, from morning news shows to Forbes Women in Leadership summits. She refused awards. She didn't issue a statement, didn't pen a blog post, and didn't sit for any profiles. Her social media remained unchanged. Her LinkedIn still listed only her role and company. No humble brags, no reflections, no hashtags. When a prominent magazine offered to name her Voice of the Year, she declined through her assistant with a single line: "Voices don't need volume to make an impact, just the truth." And it was that refusal to bask in applause that made her all the more powerful. Monique became a case study, literally. Top business schools across the US, Canada, the UK, and Singapore introduced a new module titled The Hayes Standard: Ethics, Power, and Presence. Professors praised her not as a disruptor, but as an example of clarity, restraint, and consequence. In an age of viral outrage, Monique had shown that true leadership doesn't require a microphone, just integrity, patience, and unwavering confidence in one's worth. Several months later, at Valiant Equity's Chicago office, a group of business students gathered for an internship orientation. Monique stood before them, not in the grandeur of a keynote address, but in a sunlit conference room, her sleeves rolled up, a cup of black coffee in her hand. During the Q&A, a young black woman hesitantly raised her hand. Her voice was soft but steady. "Miss Hayes," she asked, "what did you do when they doubted you?" Monique looked at her, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, of what it had once felt like to be asked that same question, to be the only one in the room with something to prove. She smiled gently, then reached into her jacket pocket and took out the same black business card she'd once placed on a hotel desk. She laid it on the table in front of her. "I didn't argue," she said quietly. "I didn't shout. I didn't explain myself to people who never intended to listen. I just stood still and let the truth land where it needed to." Then she met the student's gaze and added with quiet finality, "You don't need to raise your voice to shake a system. You just need to stand tall and let it collapse under the weight of its lie." In the hush that followed, not a single pen scratched, not a single phone buzzed. That sentence etched itself into every mind in the room. And with that, Monique Hayes, mother, leader, silent architect of consequence, did what she always had. She left the moment behind and got back to work. If you found this story meaningful, take a moment to reflect. In your own space, would you recognize quiet strength when it walks through the door? Would you choose truth over convenience? Share this message, stand for dignity, and inspire the next to rise without noise.